I gotta say, this show has not been good for what feels like a decade. Honestly, I think the last good season was 3. And with the split in season 5 and all of the outside drama surrounding this show between Costner and Taylor Sheridan, and now, I guess, the rest of the cast, it just feels so damn long since we've got Yellowstone. And man, what a disappointing way to end this series. Like and subscribe if you haven't, and hit the notification bell. If you're new, check out the channel and let me know what you think. Let's dive into Yellowstone Season 5, Part 2. At one point in my life, I used to love Yellowstone. I don't even really like it to this point. There are some really compelling characters that have stuck around, mainly Casey and Rip, but the show as a whole really has tanked. I've seen a lot of people pointing to Costner's contract and how that was handled as a culprit, and while I don't think that's the full story, it's certainly a big piece of what created this mess. But I think the rift started all the way back in Season 3. While I enjoy Season 3, and it probably is one of the best seasons, this is sort of where I first started to notice that my enjoyment for this show wasn't going to hold up. Once again, a new enemy emerges to try and seize the ranch in their land from the Duttons, storyline that has continued since Season 1. It is totally fine and makes sense to have a continuing and consistent core storyline. But by Season 3, it started to sort of feel formulaic. The Duttons defeat their enemy, all is well, then a new one comes in. And this one actually towards the end of Season 3, the last episode in fact. But the story started to feel repetitive, as there hadn't been a ton of noticeable progression around this core narrative. Then, Season 4, things started to change. The narrative did begin to progress in different directions and sort of take form, but into something worse and completely foreign to the original premise. This show became pure schlock. It became an insanely unrealistic, over-the-top melodrama. And look, I'm not saying this show is 100% accurate to life in Montana, its depictions of people who live there, or even the plight of modern-day ranchers. But at the very least, it was based in some sort of grounded reality. By the conclusion of Season 3 and the beginning of Season 4, it morphed. Companies started putting out hits on the Duttons, buildings are being bombed, and it just goes so insanely crazy. And to be fair, this show has always portrayed a modern Montana as this Wild West where there's no laws, but at least in the first 2 to 2.5 seasons, anything illegal this family did was done pretty much behind closed doors, and they were pretty meticulous about covering up their activities and their tracks. But by Season 4, it's just all out in the open. Hell, in Season 5, Casey jumps in a dude's car with a gun in the afternoon in a neighborhood. Beth fucking murders Jamie just in his house in broad daylight. And not to mention, Jamie's girlfriend gets shot up at a stop sign in her neighborhood by just 2 random assassins like it's nothing. It has just become so far removed from what it started as. My other big issue of this show is the writing and handling of these characters. The Duttons, while they're portrayed in this narrative as the heroes or the protagonists of the story, a lot of these guys are villains. But George doesn't seem to understand that. Beth is an awful person. John, although noble in what he's fighting for, is a pretty terrible person himself. John begins this series as a hardened rancher whose one mission is to do whatever it takes to protect what's his, which is his land and his family. The land he resides on has been passed down in his family for 6 generations to this point, and it's his life's work to continue that legacy because he wants to protect this sacred place, this beautiful place. And that's respectable. Even though it's kind of sketchy how his family came about getting the land, that's beside the point. The problem is, the more we learn about Jon as the series continues, the more we realize he's not really this headstrong, unflinching, heroic cowboy. He's just really an uncompromising, abusive piece of shit father. Not to mention that we really don't get a proper send-off of his character, just an unsatisfactory, lazily written final scene with a poor substitute of a body double. One of the worst aspects of this season's second half. I get it, there's a rift. But for fans' sake, just get the guy back for one episode at least. Bite the bullet and write a good ending for the character. I mean, Jesus Christ. Just get the fuck over it. It's one thing when an actor dies, but it's another thing when the showrunner / writer and the leading man have a tiff. Just acting like fucking children. And even though I haven't enjoyed Jon's character for a while, give this character a proper send-off. Please. It's not that hard. And look, I know Jon has his fans, but the dude is just constantly just verbally abusing his children. Physically for Jaime. I mean, he's a bad father. I'm just gonna say it. He's a bad father. He's continuously abusive towards Jaime when Jaime and him were around each other. He continuously forces Casey to do things that Casey obviously doesn't want to do. Casey wants nothing to do with this ranch for the majority of this series run. Doesn't want anything to do with his family's legacy. But he's pushed into these things because he wants his father to be proud of him, and he holds stuff against Casey. That's not a good parent. Anyway, let's leave it at that. Jon's awful. And then there's Beth. Good God, is Beth a terrible person and just an awful character. Like, she really hasn't had any development. She started this show as a drunken, foul-mouthed, hot-headed, yet uber-intelligent woman and ended the show in that same spot. Sure, she married Rip and she had a pseudo-child with him, but my God, every episode it's the same with this lady. She's a bad person who treats other people terribly because she hates herself. It's just gotten so exhausting, and in my opinion, she's the least redeemable character in this show. She manipulates her father against Jaime, she manipulates Jaime on many occasions, she manipulates Rip into doing her dirty work. She should have been the one to die in the finale. I'm just gonna say it. Like, this show doesn't understand its characters. I haven't rooted for Beth since like season 1. And Sheridan sets this conflict up with Jaime like it's all his fault. All because he didn't reveal that the abortion would have permanent effects. And I get it. That's terrible. I'm not saying Jaime's a good person because he does a lot of terrible shit on this show. But they were fucking teenagers. And he was trying to protect her and Rip from their father. You do stupid shit when you're a teenager. You believe things you think are right when you're a teenager, and you look back and you say, hey, I was wrong. I was like 14. Like, it just doesn't make sense. He makes a judgment call. It's a bad one, but a judgment call nonetheless. As like a 14-year-old. And that one moment leads to her just constantly ruining his life, and then in the end murdering him. After he already confessed that he was wrong to her once and apologized on multiple occasions. It doesn't make any sense. And don't even get me started on Jaime. Look, I stated he does a lot of terrible shit in this show. He abandoned his kid. That's awful. But he is the most mistreated character in this entire series. The guy spends his entire life just wanting a family, wanting a father, and he's just constantly pushed away, abused, and used as a tool by Jon for his own social political gain. Jon forces him into a life as an attorney, a life he never wanted. He's constantly disowning him and ridiculing him. He's the only person in this show who attempts to come up with any legal options for saving the ranch, but John just won't hear about it because, again, he's unwilling to compromise on anything despite having all of the cards stacked against him. And then towards the later seasons, when Jamie is at his most vulnerable, John seems to even enjoy besting his son in any opportunity he gets, especially those that exist in the public eye. But in the finale, we're just supposed to accept him as the villain and then cheer Beth on when she finally drops him. Like, what? I feel bad for this guy, this character, genuinely. Even his girlfriend, who had John killed, without Jamie's knowledge, by the way, was constantly berating him. It's insanity. Like, give this character a break. And no one, except for Pacey, ever sticks up for him. I just don't understand how we're supposed to look at this guy and say, yep, he's the villain, he deserved to die, I'm glad he died. It just, like, it doesn't fit. It doesn't work. And then there's Casey. Casey is one of the actual good characters on this show. Like, he's a good-hearted person. Everything he does to protect his wife and child. Even though he doesn't want any part of what his father's doing ever, but he does it. And I like that the good person was the one that helped to actually save this land and this ranch from, inevitably having giant condominium complexes and entertainment complexes built upon it. But anyway, Casey's an interesting character. He gets way more to do this season. I felt like the last couple, they've kind of lost sight of his character. But this season, his Navy SEAL background comes back into play. And he spurs the investigation into his father's death after they tried to brush it off as just a suicide. So that's interesting. But in the end, he gets the life he always wanted, away from the ranch, and he becomes a rancher himself. So that part was kind of confusing. I guess he just didn't want any part of his father's ranch. So, yeah, like I said, his storyline's interesting. It hasn't been interesting, I feel like, in some time. I just feel like the end of this season, we get so many send-offs for like side characters that I never really cared about. Like, they're cool characters to have in scenes and in the background, but like, this story's about the Dutton family. And I just feel like the past few seasons, Sheridan has spent so much time developing these side characters that we've forgotten about some of the main players. Like, even, like I said, Jamie's quote-unquote the main villain of the show. We really don't get much Jamie this season. Like, the first 2 episodes, sure, but then he's just kind of like forgotten about until the finale. So, I don't know. It's just it's so unfocused and messy, and it's not written well at all. There's another weird continuing thing that happens in this second part as well, where wild, crazy shit happens, and then like the very next scene, we're just like enjoying a lunch on the ranch, and everyone's happy-go-lucky, like nothing happened. Like, even like the final shot of this whole entire series, like Casey just gets murdered, or sorry, Jamie just gets murdered, and then Beth and Rip are just standing outside on their ranch talking about what they're gonna have for dinner. There's a beautiful sunset. We get like overhead landscape shots of like the beauty of Montana, and we're just supposed to feel so good about this whole thing, and it's just like, you just murdered your brother. Like, what are we doing here? It's so strange. I will say, my favorite aspect, which, again, I did not love this, but my favorite part of this second part of season 5 is that, and I respect Sheridan for doing this, is that Rainwater is really the one that saves the land. So, good. The land's returned to the people that got screwed out of it in the first place, and it brings the whole narrative of 1883 full circle when Rainwater's ancestors told the Duttons that, his descendants will claim this land again from them. And look, Rainwater is genuinely one of the most purely good characters in this show, so if anyone deserved a win in the end, it was him. This final half season contained some of the most underwhelming send offs I have ever seen. Like I said, I haven't loved this show in a long time, so I wasn't even expecting much. But couldn't we have done better than so much time spent wrapping up side characters that nobody really cares about? So much time just mishandling the arcs of main characters? This whole show has become so cartoonish that it's laughable. Look, I think Sheridan is in over his head, and to be fully transparent, I think he's a very good writer. I think Sicario, Hell or High Water, and Wind River are all three some of the best modern westerns that we've gotten to date. Hell, Sicario is one of my favorite movies of all time. But the guy just has so much on his plate right now. I just don't think he can keep up. And I think the cracks are really starting to show. What started as a beautiful, intelligently written, sort of realistic return to a evolved into this over-the-top USA-style soap opera. To the point where, compared to the 3 series in this universe, it's the worst one by a country mile. To be honest, I'm just relieved that it's all over, so we don't have to hear about all of the behind-the-scenes crap anymore, hopefully, and we don't have to anticipate a terrible ending to a show that's not even good anymore. But anyway, rest in peace, Yellowstone, and rest in peace, Jamie Dutton. You deserved better.